Right. Pardon me. Right. It's just gone 1 o'clock. There's a couple of people. 3 people have now signed in. So that's great. We'll give it 1 or 2 minutes just to see if there are any latecomers, and then we'll start this webinar. Okay, we have 4 viewers. I think that might be the lot. Let me just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. 5, 6. Okay, I'm going to start the webinar. Hopefully anybody else who's not there will join up. As before, I think everybody now has been to at least one of these. Please do send me a chat, and if you've got a question, do that via the chat button, and then I will get back and check the chats every so often. So I'm now going to transfer over to the slides for today's webinar, and I hope everybody has received the text that I sent this morning. So today we are focusing on the Europe for Citizens program. Pardon me. You all know all this. Wait a little bit before you hear what I'm actually saying, because it's a 40-second delay. We'll use the chat button or the chat sort of mechanism to take feedback. Background, I mean, we're going to cut at least 5 minutes out of today's webinar because you've all heard this stuff before. The treaty and the mission statement, this is the article in the treaty. In a sense, this is slightly less relevant to this particular program because Europe for Citizens does not have a particular culture focus. It does support culture projects, but it's a much more broadly based program. So we'll look at it. When we look at the specific criteria, you'll understand what I'm saying. Similarly, Europe for Citizens is a tiny program, and in a sense, it's always run a little bit in parallel to things such as the mission statements, the various agendas, and the current Europe 2020 document. It's not quite linked in quite the same way. Europe for Citizens, although it involves projects and activities, in some way, it's a more, I suppose, reflective program where people are encouraged to get involved in projects or meetings to think about and to contemplate various issues that underpin the European Union in terms of its history and in terms of where it might be going. So don't worry too much about Europe 2020 agenda for this. You know the split of funding programs that I keep mentioning: structural funds, transnational and external actions. Europe for Citizens is one of the transnational funds, so the idea of partnerships for mobility or for projects is fundamental within Europe for Citizens. Okay, we can move on from that. 15% of the budget, we all know that off by heart by now. Transnational funds, that's the list. You'll see that really is, I mean, I think it's even less than 203 million euros at the end of the day. It's a tiny budget compared to some of the others, even compared to the Creative Europe program. It's half the budget of the culture program. So it is a small program. But the good news is that I genuinely believe it's incredibly easy to apply for. And it's a tragedy that particularly in the UK, I mean, I know that most of the people actually who've signed up for this webinar aren't in the UK. But for those of you who are in the UK, for goodness sake, apply. It's so simple. Anyway, we'll come to that as we go through. Right, two main types of grants: project grants with partners from different countries, minimum of 3, and mobility grants. And the Europe for Citizens program, although it's small, it does provide support for both projects and mobility. I have sorry, I went a bit muffled then. I do apologize. I have a slight cold, so I'm just using a tissue. Apologies for that. I think that was probably too much information. Anyway, let's move on. So projects, partners from at least 3 countries, and mobility activities, these are relevant to the Europe for Citizens program. Less link to Europe 2020. And although there is a principle of match funding, it's a much looser principle. I mean, yesterday, when we did the culture program, it was very specific. You know, you get 60% of the budget from the Commission and 40% is match funding. In the Europe for Citizens program, you'll find that it's a much looser set of requirements for match funding, much easier to demonstrate, to address the challenge of finding the match funding. Okay. Right. Okay. So just before we start, I'm just going to check once again in case somebody's had a terrible problem and can't hear or see or something like that. Right. Nobody has said they've got a terrible problem, so I assume that we're all doing fine. I will therefore go back to the slides. Okay. A few practical things at the beginning, just to get them out of the way. That's the address, the email addresses, and the contact points. Now, the reason I put this up is particularly for our very few UK people, is that there isn't a contact point for this program in the United Kingdom, which is probably one of the reasons why fewer people are putting applications in, because there's nobody in the UK who is there to provide assistance or guidance or support or anything like that. So all you can do is you can write to the Commission directly, and those are the relevant email addresses, which are relevant to the different strands, which will make more sense once we've been through the program. We are trying to help people with this particular program, so if you've got simple questions, we should be able to help, and we are working on at least one application at the moment, so do feel free to contact us if you are interested. Introduction. Right, I'm not going to read through all this. Yes, you'll see at the bottom there, it's only actually 185 million euro, not even 203 million, as I said on the previous slide. Gone down to 185 million euros. Right. This, interestingly, I mean, the red bits at the top: increased participation in current affairs, broader understanding of the history of EU and its origins in the aftermath of 2 world wars. That's what I meant by reflective. It's reflective and engagement that they're looking at here, reflecting on the sort of history, the context in which the European Union was developed, opportunities to bring people together who might not otherwise get together, to provide them with ways in which they might meet fellow citizens, discuss and debate issues, share their experiences, look at ways in which they perceive things that are happening, that are being done by the European Union, whether these are good or bad, how might they get better involved, and so on and so forth. So these are the sorts of themes. These are very, as you can see, very broad-based themes that are relevant to the Europe for Citizens program. Structure, budget, objectives, and priorities. Okay, 2 strands and a horizontal action. Strand 1, European remembrance. Now, I will go into more detail about each of these strands, but in summary, the first strand is a single strand focused on projects, and it's projects which raise awareness of remembrance, common history and values, and the Union's aim. Okay, so that's about looking backwards. Strand. The second strand is broadly entitled Democratic Engagement and Civic Participation. In other words, different ways in which the citizens of Europe can become more engaged in the democratic process and civil society, and particularly more engaged with what the European Union is trying to do. There are 3 sub-strands here. Town twinning and networks of towns are mobility strands. So they offer relatively small grants for groups of people to meet up. Okay, town twinning is for one meeting, and network of towns, you can have a series of different meetings. I'll explain more about what the requirements are for these in a moment. Civil society projects is therefore a project strand, as it explains. Projects involving civil society organizations that are going to look at activities which involve democratic engagement and civic participation. There is a horizontal action which you don't need to worry about, because that's horizontal action about promoting and disseminating the examples of good practice that emerge from these various projects. That's not relevant to people that are attending this webinar. So let's stick to the fact that there are two strands, and within the second strand, there are some sub-strands. I hope that's clear. 195 million, 20% to the European Remembrance, 20% to the democratic engagement. But don't forget, democratic engagement strand 2 involves 3 sub-strands. So that's one of the reasons why it gets much more. And the horizontal action gets 10%, and the rest covers the administration and all the rest of it. Enables the whole thing to function. Okay, general objectives. Contribute to citizens' understanding of the Union, its history and diversity. Foster citizenship and improve conditions for civic and democratic participation. Relatively straightforward concepts, okay? So nothing complicated. Pardon me. Sorry. Nothing complicated about these general objectives. Specific objectives. Okay, the specific objectives, the first or the second bullet point here, raise awareness of remembrance, common history and its values. This is the strand 1. Promoting peace, its values, the well-being of its people by stimulating debate, reflection and the development of networks. Okay, so projects that stimulate debate, reflection and bringing people together in some sort of networking activity, tick. The strand 2, democratic and civic participation. Developing citizens' understanding of the Union policy-making processes and promoting opportunities for societal and intercultural engagement and volunteering at the Union level. Now, one of the reasons why I think that this program is so interesting to the cultural sector is that you know, this could be really dull set of projects. I mean, if this is simply like town twinning, you bring this group of people from this town, this group of people from this town, and you bring them together and you have a chat and you have a few discussions and maybe you have a debate and then maybe you have a big dance in the evening or over the weekend and you all get to know each other and it's all rather wonderful and then you all go home again. Well, that's fine. And in fact, there have been plenty of those sorts of projects that have been supported. But I just think that cultural organizations could bring so much more to these projects. They could bring imagination and using artists and creative practitioners to explore some of these issues and to create theatre plays based on these issues or to create artwork based on these issues. I just think there's so much potential for cultural and artistic organizations here. Anyway, that's me. Annual priorities. Okay, so there are annual priorities for this particular program. So every year, as well as the sort of specific, or sort of the overall priorities, there are annual priorities for this year. And I haven't updated this. I do apologize. I do apologize. I will send you, it's only just come out and I thought I had updated this presentation. Give me 1 second. What I'm just going to do is just give you the information about the 2015 updated criteria. I really do apologize for that. I thought that had been updated. But I do have it at my fingertips, famous last words. Here we go. Okay, so you'll see that last year, the European Remembrance Strand 1, the annual priorities were the 100th anniversary, beginning of World War I, 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and 10 years of enlargement. Lots of interesting anniversaries last year. So this year, 2015, it's the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. Okay, so that's the special theme, is the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. And they are looking at, therefore, projects that focus on either World War II and the associated rise of intolerance that enabled crimes against humanity, or the consequences of World War II for the post-war architecture of Europe, its divisions and the Cold War on the one hand, and the beginning of the European integration process following the Schuman Declaration in 1950 on the other hand. So looking at what came out of the Second World War, both in terms of the divided Europe and the Iron Curtain and everything else, but also the way that on the other hand, led to the Schuman Declaration, which was the beginnings of the European Union we have today. So those are the themes. I will email you these after this is over. So I have to apologize that this hasn't been updated. Strand 2, democratic engagement and civic participation. It's a very broad special theme, and it's entitled Debating on the Future of Europe. In the current debate on the European Union in times of economic crisis and following the European elections, there is a need to deepen further the discussion on the future of Europe, on what kind of Europe citizens want, also stimulating new forms of civic participation whilst reinforcing those existing. It goes on a bit more, but I'll email that to you rather than you have to listen to me read it out. But it's an interesting one because I think that, for example, when they're talking about new forms of civic participation, I mean, obviously that could be the digital agenda. It could be all sorts of ways in which you're going to engage people more in these processes. Okay, I've gone on and on and on. I'm just going to go back and, pardon me, very quickly check to see whether there is any issues about questions or anything like that. Trevelyan has a question saying that they want to do a World War I project. Right, Trevelyan, I'm really sorry, but I suspect that you may have missed the Europe for Citizens boat because World War I was their big theme last year. I'm not sure, to be honest, whether they would be particularly keen on a World War I project, particularly if you're the only World War I related project, and everybody else has put in projects related to World War II. Given World War II is their special priority, then that may be an issue. So I'm sorry, I'm the bearer of not good news, I don't think, about that one. Anyway, let's have a little think about that one later. Okay, I'm going to go back and keep going with the slides, if I can find the slides. Oh, slides. Okay. Deadlines and start dates, right. European Remembrance, the deadline is the 1st of March. Actually, I think the deadline is the 2nd of March, and they put it back because they realized the 1st of March was a Sunday. So it is actually the 2nd of March. And for European Remembrance projects start between August and 31st of January. 2nd of March is also the deadline for Strand 2. For the start dates are all listed there. And there's a second deadline in 1st of September, which is for town twinning and networks of towns. So the mobility projects, there's 2 deadlines this year and likely to be 2 deadlines in the future. But for the projects, there's just 1 deadline, and that's coming up in about 10 days. You might be hard-pressed to put an application together in that particular period. But I don't know, maybe not. You're notified within 4 months after the application deadline. You're informed in writing, and there's a website there if you want to look at the statistics from the last program. You can go and have a little look at that. I put up some statistics here just to sort of make the point about how pathetic the UK applications are. It's a good success rate. If you look down towards the bottom, you'll see the second last row is success rates. The EU average is 33.37. The UK average is 33.39. So we're at least the average, 1 in 3. Italy is just below the average, but look above at the number of successes. Italy, similar population to the UK, 754 successful projects. UK, 186. Pathetic. So could try harder. Plenty of scope, therefore, I think, in this particular strand. Eligibility criteria. Right. Legal status, you have to be public bodies or non-profit organizations with legal status. Okay. They're fairly straightforward. You cannot be a private profit-making organization for this particular program. You may have to give some evidence that you've got experience in running the sorts of projects that you're putting forward an application for, but that is quite straightforward as far as this particular program is concerned. Must be established in one of the countries participating in the program, and the wonderful criteria about partners, at least one member state must be involved. I think that's great. So in theory, you could do a project involving just one member state. Not a good idea. You should involve more than one member state, but there are absolutely no rules about whether they will accept 2 member states, 3 member states, 5 member states, 10 member states, and so on. It's really up to you and your project idea. It's open to the 28 member states of the EU. There's the long list of who the member states are. I'm sure you know all that by now. And it's potentially open to other categories of countries, the accession countries, the candidate countries, potential candidate countries, the EFTA countries, which is Norway and Iceland, and so on. Last time I looked, none of these had signed the Memorandum of Understanding to participate, but that may have changed recently. And if anybody wants me to check, I'm certainly happy to check that. Okay. Award criteria, general principles, right? Accessible to all, without any form of discrimination. I mean, obviously, this program, which is about citizenship, is very big on equal opportunities and non-discrimination and reaching hard-to-reach groups. So if your project involves some of that, then that's an extra big tick. They're also interested, you'll see, multilingual character of the European Union. This is not very good for those of us applying from the United Kingdom, who are not very multilingual, but it is an issue that they are keen to include, or keen to address, or keen to see addressed, and the need to include underrepresented groups. Transnationality. This is wonderful, because what they don't say is, they don't say you need to have a minimum of 3 partners, but they do say your project should be transnational. But it's entirely up to you as to how you make the project transnational. And there are interesting different options here about the way in which you make your project transnational, by bringing in partners from different countries, by targeting the results of the project to different countries, and also by focusing on not just the transnational elements, but the local elements as well, so that you are genuinely engaging local people and that they are going to be involved in helping disseminate the results and proselytize about the success of the project, and so on. Intercultural dialogue is another underpinning theme. You don't have to address all of these themes in your project or activity, but it is interesting that they are mentioned as you know, you should be aware that these are the sorts of themes they're interested in. You know, the richness of the cultural and linguistic environment in Europe, promoting mutual understanding and tolerance, respectful, dynamic, and multifaceted. I mean, all these issues, of course, are incredibly crucial and important at the moment, given the terrible events that have been happening in the last couple of months in France and most recently in Denmark. I mean, all those issues and problems and challenges that the sort of liberal Western European societies are facing are really relevant to this particular program. So I think that hopefully there'll be some very interesting project applications that come through this particular program. Volunteering. They're also very keen to support projects which stress or involve volunteers in whatever way that they do. Their volunteering obviously is very important in civil society, and they want to embrace that. Okay, so those are the general award criteria. Then there are specific award criteria. So for all strands, there are a series of standard criteria, okay? And as I said yesterday when I was talking about the criteria for the culture program, these criteria are becoming more common. You know, so they're going to be standard criteria across the various different programs. And what you'll see in a moment here is the criteria here, quite similar to the culture program. The first criteria, consistency with the objectives. In other words, how does the project relate to the objectives of the program? How closely does it relate to that? 30% of the mark. How are you going to contribute to the achievement of the objectives of the program? Is the thematic focus in line with the objectives of the program, taking into account the annual priorities and so on? So obviously, if your project, sadly, was World War I and the annual priority was World War II, then you may lose points, I'm afraid, at that particular award criteria. The second award criteria is the quality of the plan. So appropriate plan, coherence, effectiveness, European dimension, different types of organizations gathering together, different types of activities, citizens coming from different target groups, projects using new working methods or innovation, or working with people who come with fewer opportunities, disadvantaged people, and so on. So quality of the actual activities that the project is going to do. And the third criteria, sorry, let me just check there. The third criteria is dissemination. So the way in which you are going to exploit and disseminate the results, the way in which the project might create a multiplier effect among a wider audience than those who are just participating in the activity, and the ways in which you're going to enable a transfer and exchange of the results foreseen by the project. I mean, fairly straightforward stuff. That's what the dissemination is all about. And then number 4 is the impact and the citizens' involvement. So they're looking for European outreach. So they want to see projects that have a significant impact, particularly those linked to the European Union policies, talk about sustainability, getting people to get actively engaged, balance between people who are already doing things as opposed to those who are not yet involved, citizens from underrepresented groups or those with less opportunities. So all of that is really important. Okay. Now, as well as those overarching criteria, then there are some individual strands have particular criteria. So for European remembrance, we have activities that invite reflection on European cultural diversity and so on. Now, this is interesting because this last year, the last program, last 7-year program, this was the only real theme within European remembrance. So it was very much focused on, the causes of totalitarian regimes in Europe's modern history. But now we have that second bullet point, which has been introduced to make it much more broad-based criteria. Actions which encourage tolerance, mutual understanding, intercultural dialogue and reconciliation as a means of moving beyond the past and building the future, particularly reaching the younger generation. And again, it just goes on to say about different types of organizations and citizens from different target groups. And there must be some transnational element or with a clear European dimension. So that's what European remembrance is all about. Practically, any sorts of organizations, civil society organizations, cultural organizations, you must have a partners from at least one member state and preferably transnational. The maximum you can get is 100,000 euros. Activities must take place in the various eligible countries and you can run it for up to 18 months. Here's a couple of examples. This was a play that was done a few years ago, a theatre play centered on the disabled Holocaust. And it toured to venues in Scotland and England, and they invited European partners to participate, after-show talks and audience engagement, and so on and so forth. That's one example. There were 2 successful projects in the first call in the New Strand in 2014. The Imperial War Museum got nearly 100,000 euros for the Positive Propaganda Project, and the Netherhall Education Association got 100,000 for Dissent, Conscience, and the Wall. Which sounds like an interesting project, although I know very little about it. So those were the 2 successful projects in the first round of the new program. Strand 2, democratic engagement and civic participation. I think I've said probably enough about this, and I'm going to start repeating myself. Civic participation in the broader sense, maybe linked to European Union policies, enabling people to participate in policy-making processes, and so on and so forth. So this goes on to the sorts of activities that you might put together. And note that it also covers projects which develop opportunities, mutual understanding, intercultural learning, solidarity, societal engagement, and volunteering. So I'm beginning to sound like a broken record. It's the same sorts of themes that keep coming through. In town twinning. Now, town twinning is the substrand, which is essentially a mobility exercise, but it's limited to town twinning arrangements. So you can only apply if you are a local authority working, or municipal, city council or something, who has a town twinning arrangement, or if you are an independent town twinning association that has some sort of town twinning arrangement. So they're the only people who can apply for that. So we'll probably move on. This is the sorts of details. You need at least 2 partners here. You must have invited participants, minimum of 25, and they're the international participants. You may have 100 people involved in your meeting, but at least 25 of them have to come from outside the host country. You get a maximum of 25,000 euros. They must take place in any of the eligible countries participating, and you can run it for up to 21 days, the maximum duration of the particular meeting. So this is for a single meeting. It may only go for 2 or 3 days. That's absolutely fine. May have far fewer than 25 invited participants. Again, you will get less money in that case. This is an example. This is a very small project. They just got 15,000 euros, exchanging art groups between 3 towns to sort of bring them closer together. They got the local choir and the children's and youth orchestra from one of the other towns, and so on. So it's fairly straightforward. They organised a conference at the museum, an exhibition on the topic, and those sorts of things. That's an example of a culture-related project. UK-led projects in 2013, there were quite a few of these. These are some of the organisations that applied, and you'll see it's a collection of local authorities and town twinning associations. Networks of towns. Now, this is people working together on a common theme. Now, it seems to me, from my reading of this, that you can set up, it's fairly easy to set up a network of towns. I mean, you should be endorsed by your local authority. You don't have to be, the members of the network do not have to be local authorities. I mean, if you were a leading museum, or not even a leading museum, if you were a museum or a theatre company or a cultural organisation in a town, and you had some contacts in 2 or 3 other towns, and you wanted to get together and create a little network of towns led by these cultural organisations, great, do it. Try and get the local authority to endorse this network. It would be useful, because that will give you additional credibility, but it's not impossible to set one of these up. This is again to support mobility activities, okay? So this is for a series of meetings, which would be a range of activities around subjects of common interest. You need to have specific target groups that you will try to involve in these particular meetings, and hopefully this would all set up some sort of enthusiasm and or practical mechanisms to do more things in the future. Types of organisations, almost anybody. Municipalities, other levels of local authorities, representations, non-profit organisations. But do note, in addition to the applicants mentioned above, non-profit civil society organisations, which includes cultural organisations, can be partners in these projects. Must be at least 4 eligible countries, 30% of invited participants from outside the host. You get 150,000 euros. You must do at least 4 events per project, and they can last for up to 2 years. Okay. Here's an example: Place of Culture in Tomorrow's Europe. You'll see a range of partner countries were involved there, including an associate country, which was Tunisia, which was various interregional meetings and a large forum, various debates and discussions. They got together to sort of talk about that particular theme. UK-led projects in this particular strand, and I'm not saying any of these necessarily were culture projects, although obviously one did have the word culture mentioned in it. These were various UK-led projects over the period of the last round of 2007 to 2013. Okay, and so that leads us to the 2.3, which is the project strand, civil society projects. Giving citizens an opportunity to participate in the EU policy-making process in areas related to programme activities. So agenda-setting activities, feedback on relevant initiatives. In other words, looking at the various themes of what the European Union is trying to do, bracket, which includes addressing or looking at ways in which the issues arising from the events recently might be dealt with, and putting together projects which are going to explore how we can engage citizens more with the goals of the European Union, which are trying to achieve these sorts of goals on a European level. Projects should stimulate and organise reflection, debates, or other activities, and propose concrete solutions that might be found through cooperation and coordination, involve a large number of citizens in the implementation, aim for a long-lasting networking between organisations. So those are quite clearly desired results there. Projects implemented by transnational partnerships must include 2 of the following activities. So debates, campaigns, actions on themes of common interest, gathering of opinions from individual opinions of citizens, and volunteering. So 2 of those 3 types of activities should be included in any one particular project. Practical, organisations applicants and partners can be almost anybody, including cultural organisations. Organisations from at least 3 member states, of which 3 eligible countries, of which at least 1 is an EU member state. You get up to 150,000 euros. Activities must take place in any of the eligible countries, and you can do the project for 18 months, or up to 18 months. Okay, here's an example. International playback theatre activity for EU migration, a relatively modest amount of money they got here, just €20,000, which was looking at a seminar, which was exploring some of the issues to do with their performances that they had developed, which were about immigrants' integration into society. So they shared their experiences with colleagues not only from Lithuania, also Ireland, Great Britain, and also from Hungary, to try and sort of, spread the stimulus of the ideas behind this particular project. UK-led projects. Here are some examples of UK-led projects. Fair Trials International European Young Defenders Network, extraordinary. I'm not going to read all those out. None of them necessarily have anything to do with culture. I just throw in, but they're the list of projects that I found. There'll be very few that have had much to do with culture. I would just point out that the Euclid Network project has nothing to do with us. That is a completely separate Euclid Network. We were here first, but there is now another Euclid Network, and they did that particular project. Okay, I'm just going to go back and check on the chat to see if anybody has any further questions. No, nobody has any further questions. Okay, so I will go back to the presentations. Okay, now there are action grants and operating grants. Forget operating grants. We're not talking about organizations applying for operating grants. This is completely separate and not really relevant. We're talking about action grants, in other words, grants for mobility or projects. So it's the action grants we're focusing on here. And it's all based on a lump sum arrangement. And the lump sum arrangement covers everything that you might spend money on. But you get a lump sum, which is on the final page of the text note I sent you this morning. You'll see the schedule for the lump sum payments. The lump sum is based upon numbers participating, numbers of activities, and so on and so forth. So this means that there is much less reporting back required of your financial spend, provided you can demonstrate that the targeted number of people did attend, they did take part, there were activities. That's what this particular program is interested in. Okay. Right. Countering, the lump sum is based on the number of participants. For other strands and measures, it's based on the number of participants, the number of countries, and the number of events. Okay, initially you do participants and countries, and then for several events you just add them all up. I think it's fairly straightforward. I don't think there's anything complicated here. It just does make it so much easier. So you don't have to worry about putting together. I mean, obviously you've got to make sure that what you're applying for is going to cover all the costs and so on. But you don't really have to sort of worry about all the detailed expenditure and reporting back that you do, for example, in the culture program. Now, these are the principles behind the lump sum payments. I'm not going to go through those. Unicity, wonderful word, unicity. Never heard of it. Simplicity, transparency, equal treatment, and efficiency. And that's true. The efficiency is probably the most important in a way, because it means that there's faster processing of final reports and consequently faster payment of your final bit of your money that you're hoping to get at the end of the project. When a project's approved, you receive a grant decision or a grant agreement. People, I think you're all within the European Union, so you would get a grant decision. That's all fairly straightforward. If you want to look up what these look like, you can go to that particular website there. Okay, financial rules and arrangements. As I said, they need to just be sure that you have the financial capacity. That's a fairly cursory check for much of this particular program, I have to say, because these are relatively modest amounts of money. It's not as if they're giving you €3 million or anything like that. You have to submit a declaration on your honor that you're not bankrupt or being wound up or whatever it might be. If you're applying for more than 60,000, you need to submit a financial capacity form and the various financial statements, but that shouldn't be a problem. It's the same sort of thing you have to submit for the culture program. If you're a public body, it's worth saying that the financial capacity check doesn't apply. So if you are a local authority or municipality or university or some other public body, you don't have to go through all this particular palaver. Okay. The agency may ask for more information about this if it feels the need to, but it's extremely unlikely. They cannot finance the entire costs of the project. That's true, they can't. So match funding is required, but there are no rules. You just have to indicate that you are bringing in some additional funding to help cover the cost of the project. And it's as vague as that from what I can gather. There's no need to sort of say we're bringing in this amount specifically. If you are bringing in a specific amount, that's great, but you don't necessarily have to sort of go into that level of detail. Also, apart from the actual schedule for the project costs, you can get some money for preparatory activities. So, if you need to do a bit of research prior to actually running the project, you can apply for a bit of extra money to undertake some preparatory activities. This is all explained in the documents that I sent you earlier this morning. Okay, so you can add in a small extra bit of money for preparatory activities. Only one grant from the EU budget, so you can't apply to lots of different programs and collect lots of money from each of the programs. It's fairly straightforward. You are asked in your application form to indicate if you're putting in any other applications for this project, and if you are, you obviously have to, if you were lucky enough to get all of them, you have to sort of send one back. Obviously, you can't make a profit, so therefore you'll need to just be very aware of that particular issue. Principal should not apply to grants based on lump sums and to grants lower than equal to €60,000. So, I think that's what that's saying, is that for the sorts of grants you're talking about, you don't need to worry about the non-profit principle because they're assuming that you're not going to make a profit. You can't have a retrospective grant. If you've done the project, they're not going to give you money for that. You may be able to get a bit of money for a project that's already begun, but you certainly can't get money for a project for activity that's happened prior to the date of submission. So you can't get money for anything that might have happened prior to the date, but you might be able to get a little bit of money for activities happening between the date of submission and the official project start. Okay. Subcontracting is allowed. You just have to make sure you're doing it properly, getting best value for money. You demonstrate that you sought quotes and so on and so forth. Again, these are small amounts of money here. Again, the maximum you can get is 150,000 euro. It's unlikely there's going to be massive amounts of subcontracting involved in these projects, but it is allowed providing you follow the right rules and regulations. There is pre-financing available, not for town twinning, but for the other three strands, the networks of towns, European Remembrance and civil society. You get up to 50% of the grant within 30 days of signing it. This does mean, however, that you need to have the cash flow to be able to manage the financial implications, because you get 50% of the grant. The rest of it will not come until the end of the project. Now, it will come quite quickly at the end of the project, but still, it's at the end of the project, so you will have to have the capacity to carry that. If your financial capacity is suspect, then they may ask for a guarantee of some sort. But I actually don't think that's going to be relevant for most people here. You can modify during the process of the grant. You can actually, write to the commission and sort of say, things have changed slightly. We want to modify things. That's exactly all they're saying. And you can extend the duration of the project by up to 3 months if you have really, really, really good reason for so doing. Final report has to be submitted within 2 months following the end date of the project. And you have to send all the various, annexes and whatever they require, which you download from that particular website. Again, much more straightforward, however, and simple than, for example, the culture program. Final payment will be, obviously, they're not going to give you money that might make a profit. If you haven't delivered the right number of people, well, then they will adjust the final payment to recognize what you've done right and what you've done wrong. Audits. Selected project applications may be subject to checks, audits, and evaluations. That's fine. They come in and audit projects. They select a small number, 10% of the projects to audit, and in which case they'll just come and go through your project application fairly carefully to make sure it's being used correctly. Okay, visibility and publicity. The beneficiary, so you receiving money, you must grant the European Commission the right to make free use of the results, providing it doesn't breach confidentiality and all that. But the Commission has the right to use the results of your particular project in whatever way they see fit. The beneficiaries, if you are a beneficiary, then you need to do a certain number of things. Obviously, you must keep mentioning the fact that your project has had European Commission support, and this must be acknowledged in all publications and all sorts of activities, so posters, programs, banner stands, anything else that you're producing, you must acknowledge the support of the European Commission. And you should try and get as much media coverage, I'm sure many people do this anyway, as you possibly can, during which time you will also mention the support from the European Commission. This is all quite standard stuff. The Commission will publish a list of all the results on their website. There is a clause which says that they will forego doing all this if there is a really, really good reason. I can't imagine what the really good reason might be, to be honest. So you have to just acknowledge that this is a good thing, that they will be promoting your project on their various websites and databases. Valorization and dissemination, this is the nice way of saying that they simply want you to do as much as you possibly can as well to disseminate the results of the project. This is going beyond the participants who are involved in the project, just making sure that you're doing everything you possibly can to make sure the results are seen as widely as possible. Making a submission. Okay, so some practical points about making a submission. It's all done electronically. Absolutely simple, straightforward, no printing out, nothing to be sent on discs or memory sticks or anything like that. You must get a PIC code. So all applicant and the partners must have a PIC code. That's the participant identification code. Very easy. Go to that website at the bottom there, the participant portal, and register. Remarkably straightforward. You will then get a PIC code. Your partners will all do the same. You will have a bunch of PIC codes. Once you have your PIC codes from you and your partners, you can then start filling in the application form. Go to the application form, fill in all the details, add the declaration of honour. It's really straightforward. I mean, much more straightforward than the culture program. Very similar to the culture program application insofar as there's a section about the various applicants, a bit of history about who they are, contact details, what sort of work they do, that sort of background, and then a summary of the project, and then you answer some questions. You don't have to write long, detailed project descriptions like you do for the culture program. It's all done within the single application form. There's no separate budget sheets or anything like that. That's also done within the application form. Simple. If the agency requests more information, you may have to send some of the things that are listed there. It's extremely unlikely. They very rarely seem to ask for this information, like VAT documents, copy of your memorandum and article setting you up, financial capacity forms, and so on and so forth. For town twinning and networks of towns, you have to provide some proof that you're acting on behalf of the local authorities if you are a non-profit organisation making the application or a twinning committee. So you just need to provide that sort of evidence. That shouldn't be too difficult. And that's it. That's all I really need to say about the Europe for Citizens programme. I mean, I am going through helping an organisation write a project bid at the moment, and we're in the middle of that. I mean, it's only 10 days away, so we're actually more than in the middle of it. And I have to say, we are finding it remarkably simple and straightforward in terms of preparing the application. So, even if you had some good idea and some partners in mind, you probably would be able to put one together between now and the 2nd of March, even though it's just under 2 weeks till the 2nd of March. It's 2 weeks yesterday. So maybe want to think about that. Good idea and the strong partners, again, these are key things that cover up across all the different applications if you're involved in projects. That's certainly worth thinking about. That's the standard Euclid slide. You've had all that. And that's the end of this particular webinar. And I'm going to go back to look at the chat to see if anybody has any additional questions. And you'll be pleased to know we finished 10 minutes early today. It's a much more simple and straightforward program. The program we'll be doing tomorrow is the Erasmus Plus program. That is a lot more complicated and will take at least an hour to go through that one. Right, here we go. There are some questions that have come in. Are applications with match prioritized or scored more highly over those with none? No, because it is assumed that all projects have some match. There is no box you fill in which says, and our match equals 10, or our match equals 0, or our match equals 100, or whatever it might be. You just talk about your match funding. Okay, you say, yes, we have secured match funding, we have support from our local authority, we have support from the local butcher, or we have support from wherever it might be. There's nothing in any detail about levels of match funding. So it really isn't, I don't think, an issue that's going to earn you more or less brownie points. Can we make more than one application for different projects to different funds? Yes, you can make as many projects applications to different programs as you like, providing they are for different projects. I do apologize for having to keep blowing my nose. And the key thing is different projects. And many organizations do this. I mean, festivals, for example, what they do is they compartmentalize their festival into the various different activities. And they apply to the culture program for that particular activity, and they apply to the Europe for Citizens for a different sort of activity, and they apply to Erasmus for another activity, and they apply to Interreg for another activity. It's absolutely fine, providing it's absolutely clear that these are separate and distinct activities. And there's no question that you're getting the money for the same sorts of activities. You do have to be a little bit careful about match funding in some cases to make sure you're not using the same match funding to match the grants you're getting from the European Union. But I'm sure you would never, ever do such a thing. Right, so I think I've answered those couple of questions that have come in. I will hang on for a few more moments, as usual, to see if there are any other questions. But again, as I keep saying, do feel free to send me an email at any point if you have specific questions about this. But I do strongly urge people to consider this particular strand because it is relatively straightforward to apply for. Any other questions? If you have no questions, you're about to sign off. If you could just send me a chat, pardon me, that would be great. So I then know that I can sign off as well. And I'll be communicating with some of you, I think, on the Erasmus Plus webinar on Thursday as well. No webinar tomorrow, day off. Okay, well, I think everybody has probably, I've given time for questions. I don't think anybody has any questions, so I think I will log off at this particular point. If you have any other questions, then please do feel free to send me an email. Okay, I think we're logging off. I'll see you all at another webinar. Thanks very much.